It being 10:02, I'm going to call this meeting to order. In addition to the 6 commissioners up here, Commissioner Amina Young is on the phone from Philadelphia. She's under the weather today, but she'll be participating telephonically. My name is David Barish, Chairman of the Gaming Control Board. Before we begin, as always, please put your electronic devices on silent. Joining us today, Fred Strathmeyer, representing Russell Redding, Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, Jen Langen, representing Joe Torsella, our new state treasurer, and Bob Coyne, representing Eileen McNulty, but Secretary McNulty is here. Nice to have you here. Thank you all for coming. A quorum being present, I'll call things to order. First order, the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A few housekeeping announcements before we proceed. The board held an executive session yesterday, January 31st, to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters that we're going to be considering today. Additionally, I'd like to announce that the Gaming Control Board will be holding a public hearing regarding the casino license renewal for Downs Racing LP, the operator of Mohegan Sun Pocono, on March 29th, 2017 at 10 a.m. at the Plains Township Fox Hill Firehouse No. 2, located on 52nd Street, Plains, Pennsylvania. Citizens, community groups, and elected officials wishing to present oral or written testimony, which will be part of the evidentiary record in this matter, will be able to register beginning in mid-February by clicking on the Quick Links section of the home page of the Gaming Control Board website. The deadline for registration to speak and for receipt of public comments on the Mohegan Sun Pocono renewal is noon on Monday, March 27th. Written comments can be mailed to the Gaming Control Board at Post Office Box 69060, Harrisburg, PA 17106. Attention to the board clerk. Comments can also be faxed to the board clerk prior to the deadline at 717-265-7416 or emailed to boardclerk@pa.gov. I'd also like to announce for a second time that the public session that was originally scheduled for February 22nd has been canceled. Our next scheduled public session will be held on March 15th, 10 a.m. in this room. Before we get into particulars of today's meeting, at this time I must announce that it's quite likely that this is the last meeting of 2 of our fellow board members, Greg Feit, who has served as both chairman and commissioner, and Keith McCall, who has chaired for many years as commissioner. I'd just offer a couple of brief comments as the prerogative of the chair. Others of my fellow board members have served with these 2 gentlemen for longer than I, but in my 16 months of working with them, I just have a couple of comments. First, I'd like to thank both of you for your constant sense of humor and goodwill, which helps make things actually work around here. Your commitment always to do the right thing. Your support of me personally as I've been getting my feet dry, shall we say, and above all, your friendship. And I say to both of you, vaya con Dios. If there are any other comments from other board members.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I too would like to add to your comments, both to Speaker McCall, as I refer to him. That's a high honored position in this Commonwealth, in the history of this Commonwealth, for his almost 4 decades of service to the citizens of this Commonwealth. I salute you, sir, and thank you too for your leadership, your friendship, what I've learned from you in the process in which I have been only a year and a half now on this board, and to Greg Feit. Greg, to you also, sir, for your over 2 decades of service to the citizens of this Commonwealth in elected capacity, both you and the Speaker, of course, to serve constituents yourselves, in your appointed capacity as a predecessor I guess, twice removed from the secretary who's with us today in revenue, and for your historic leadership of implementing with Governor Rendell and with the colleagues in the legislature this process and the enterprise that is the gaming process here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. For your leadership as chairman and for your friendship. Two outstanding collegial gentlemen, and I salute you both.
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to believe, Keith and Greg, that it's been over 5 years since I came onto the board. And when I came onto the board, obviously you two gentlemen were already here. And to be perfectly honest, it's going to seem strange around this place without you. Both of you have made huge contributions to this board during the time I've been on it. Keith, you brought, as Dick has alluded, a unique perspective. You were in the House when the legislation was debated and when it became law, and I always found your participation, your input invaluable, and I mean that. You had a certain knowledge I didn't have, and it really was helpful. And from your perspective, Greg, you go back that far too in the executive branch working for Governor Rendell, but you were in on the ground floor. You had to implement it. So the history you provided this board when I was here the entire time has been invaluable. And in addition, when I came in as chairman and replaced you. And I looked to you for advice and counsel, and you provided both and made the first few months of my work on the board a whole lot easier than it would have otherwise been. And I just want to thank both of you for being outstanding public officials, outstanding people who work truly for the public. And that's important. And we got a lot done, a lot of good things done, and we had fun doing it. And both of you, I'm sure, have to know that you're going to be missed. Can't lose two gentlemen like you and not miss them, and you're going to be missed. We'll see you around, I'm sure, all the time, but I just want to wish both of you the best of luck.
Sir?
There's something you wish to say?
Well, I'll certainly try
I know you're a
to
man
come
of-
up with
you're a
something.
man of few words.
I don't like to be verbose, but I'll try to come up with something. Because really, words can't really express how I feel. It's a sad day. Although I know that there are fine people still on the board because I'm still on the board, so it has to be fine people still on the board. But I'm just going to miss you guys. You've been wonderful to work with. It's been fantastic having you here, and I really can't express how I feel, so I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks. All right. We have some resolutions that I would need a motion. First is a resolution regarding Commissioner and former Chairman Greg Feit. May I have a resolution? May I have a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt Resolution 2017-1-EXE honoring Commissioner Greg Feit for his service to this board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Regarding resolution for Commissioner Keith R. McCall, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt Resolution 2017-2-EXE, honoring Commissioner Keith McCall for his service to this board.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thanks, both of you.
When do we get to talk, Dave?
Now, let's go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, All right.
Seniority rules.
There you go. Thank you. I do want to say a few words. We started this endeavor known as the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board in April of 2003. Governor Rendell was elected in November 2002. This was a hallmark of his campaign to reduce property taxes in Pennsylvania through the proceeds of legalized gambling. And he asked me as Secretary of Revenue to start a committee to go out and look at other states and find out what they did right and what they did wrong. And I was so fortunate to have my dear, dear friend Eileen McNulty, my dear friend Susan Hensel, Lynn Stell, who many of you remember was a consultant to our group, and Kurt Haynes, who was an IT professional in the Department of Revenue. We went out, looked at 4 or 5 different states, gathered information, budgets, org charts, regulations, and came back. And then when the gaming bill was passed, which didn't happen until July 5th of 2004, so almost a year and a half after we formed our initial committee, we were ready to go. And we met with those initial board members, gave them the information that we had gathered in our due diligence efforts, and we were off to the races. I can't think of a better first board to have than the board that we had. They took a lot of arrows, they took a lot of shots, and they made tremendous decisions up and down their decision chain. And we started off with gaming. The first licenses were issued in December of 2006. There were rocky days back then. Those of you who were here as employees understood that, but you kept your heads down, your morale high, and you plugged ahead. And today, when I look at what we have in this Commonwealth, the casinos, the bustling casinos, the hotels, the shops, the economic development that we have, there is no doubt that gaming in Pennsylvania has been an unmitigated success. There are over 18,000 jobs in this industry. There are $410 million spent by the casinos with other businesses in Pennsylvania, and there have been $12.7 billion of tax revenue from this industry put into this Commonwealth. And we can, as we're in tough economic times now, vis-a-vis the state budget, you can imagine where we would be if we had $12.7 billion less. And in closing, I want to thank my fellow board members, Bill, Tony, David, Keith, Dick, Amina, Bob, Jennifer, and Fred. We have had a lot of fun on this board. We take our job seriously, but we always try not to take ourselves too seriously. And the employees who work around our conference room when we're in our meetings, you hear us yell, but mostly you hear us laugh. And that has been a hallmark of this board since the very, very beginning. I am unaware of any decision that this board in its 12 years has ever made that was a Democratic or a Republican decision. It just never happened. We may disagree. We may, put a no vote on a certain issue, but it was never, ever the Republicans vote one way and the Democrats vote another way. And I go back to the original board. Their commitment to do what they feel is right, regardless of politics, is why we are where we are today. And finally, I want to thank our staff. You guys, you're the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know where to begin. Let me first start by saying I want to thank the gentleman who appointed me, Frank Dermody, for his infinite wisdom in making this appointment for me to this board. But it truly has been an honor and a privilege for me to serve the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in this capacity. I can echo a lot of what Greg says. First and foremost, I came on this board to ensure the integrity of gaming for all levels of gaming in our casinos, and equally to ensure that the industry can flourish under our regulation. And I think when you hear what Greg has said, I think it's a story that we just do not tell often enough. From protecting, and this all started, this whole debate about gaming all started about saving the harness racing and thoroughbred industry here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I think we've done that. Not only the industry, but the breeders, the jockeys, the trainers, all have experienced great benefit from casino gambling here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But the bottom line is that it aids the number one industry in this Commonwealth, and that's agriculture. People don't realize how much the ancillary spin-off of the racing industry itself benefits agriculture and that industry here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And with all that being said, when you think about the jobs, 16,000 plus jobs created in this Commonwealth with this industry, this very agency, little under 300 jobs. These 300 jobs are family-sustaining jobs as well as the jobs in the casinos, jobs that would not be in this Commonwealth were it not for this industry, including this agency with the 300 jobs that we have in this agency. So it really is a story that we don't tell enough, not to mention the approximate $700 million a year that goes to property tax reform for the citizens of this Commonwealth. That still ask, where is that money? Yet it does flow back into those school districts to reduce property taxes, and the countless millions of dollars that goes to the local share that many of these communities, the promises that we made to these communities with that local share dollars was so they could handle the impact that casino gambling may have on their communities. And it has been a windfall for them, but it has really aided those communities in providing community services. And I think it has to be said that the impacts that we thought were going to be there, crime, delinquency, all those problem gaming, they're there, but not to the degree or level that people ever imagined. So it really, truly has been a success story. And I have to commend the legislature. When you look around this country and you look at gaming and casino gaming around the country, this was a very well thought out plan, very well thought out legislation, and I think we're all realizing the success of all of that. To the dedicated staff of this agency, Kevin O'Toole, Doug Sherman, Steve Cook, all people that I've worked with every day, Cyrus Petrie, Susan Hensel, Susan Yoakum, Claire Yantis, Jerry Stoll, Moselle Daniels, Doug Harbaugh, Liz Lanza, Paul Morrow, Paul Resch, all of you, you're all our frontline resources, our frontline employees that we couldn't do this job without you. I've said oftentimes, institutions are only as good as the people that work in those institutions. And the staff of this agency has done an outstanding job in making all of us at this board look good. For your due diligence, for your work ethic, your dedication to the job, you're all to be highly commended for that. And I'm proud to call you colleagues, but more importantly, I'm proud to call you a friend. To Bob Coyne, Jennifer Langdon, Fred, it's always been a pleasure. Don't miss a meeting. Sit through those executive sessions. And the input that all of you have offered has been invaluable to this board, and I appreciate the time and the effort that all of you put in as well. Mary Lou, who was my secretary, retired about 2-3 weeks ago. I'm not even sure. Somewhere in that vicinity. Evelyn earlier in the back there. Evelyn, thank you, Evelyn. Doreen Apple, Pam Lewis, Doherty, Kathy, all people that I dealt with on a day-to-day basis. Thank you so much for all of the work that you've done on behalf of the agency, on my behalf. I appreciate all the time and the effort that you put in. But last but not least, I certainly want to thank this board and the previous board members that I've served with. Not only the camaraderie, the collegiality, the common purpose, partnership, and counsel. I can honestly say that this board has always worked in a thoughtful, reflective way. And I want to thank Kevin and Doug Sherman and Steve for always in a well-articulated way as well. I've witnessed a lot in my career, almost 40 years. But what impresses me the most is how well we work together as a group on this board. All of us from different backgrounds and different ideology, but all with the same resolve to do what is best for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and its citizens. I think what Greg said, that he talks about Democratic and Republican. I think a lot of agencies could take a page out of our book and learn from it. It's amazing, just through communication and talking and working with each other, we're able to get things done now. It's different at this level. We don't have the controversies that you may have across the street. But we've always worked together for a common purpose and a common resolve, and for the betterment of this, the people of this Commonwealth and the industry that we regulate. And that is what has most impressed me, is how we've always come together, and 99.9% of the time came out with a unanimous decision on the things that we do. So I just want to thank all of you, all of the employees, the board members. I'm going to certainly miss having my cigar with Mr. Jewell, Dick Jewell, and Tony Moscato before our dinners and after our dinners, because we solved a lot of the world problems with those meetings. Bill, you included, and Greg as well. So I'm going to miss all of you, but hopefully we will cross paths in future times, I'm sure. And I look forward to seeing you in those times. But thank you so very, very much for the collegiality and support that you've shown me over the years.
Now
Let's get back to work.
Yeah, get back to work. Enough of that.
Motion to adjourn.
I love you, man. Yes, next we consider a motion to approve the minutes and transcripts of December 14th, 2016 meeting. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the minutes and transcript of the December 14th, 2016 meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Under new business, we'll hear from Kevin O'Toole at this time, our executive director.
Good morning, Chairman Barish. Good morning, members of the board. As I was considering what my executive director's report would be for today, I wanted, first of all, I wanted to, before we got too far away from calendar year 2016, recognize in a public forum the success of the casino industry, at least with respect to generation of gaming revenue. But more importantly, as the spokesperson for the staff, I wanted to thank, on behalf of the staff and myself, Commissioners Fite and McCall, for their long years of support and guidance and leadership on the Gaming Control Board. And as I'm looking at those two topics, it became very obvious that they're interrelated with one another. The decision-making of Keith and Greg in consultation with all of the board members, past and present, have really contributed not only to the success of the Gaming Control Board, but to the success of the casinos as well. The willingness to adopt and consider technological developments in gaming equipment and to promulgate new games and variations of existing games has really given the industry the tools that they need to put the best gaming product on the gaming floors in Pennsylvania. So the industry in 2006, for the first time exceeded $3.2 billion in gross aggregate gaming revenue, and that's to date. The prospects for the future continue to be good. There are significant gaming expansions down the line that have been made public, in a continuation of non-gaming amenities and hotel development. So it's quite a legacy for Keith and Greg as they get to the end of their tenure as board members, that you not only contributed to the board's success, but to the industry's success as well. Thank you very much.
Doug Sherman.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. I have the easy task today because there's no regulations, no petitions, no withdrawals or surrenders, and just a handful of report and recommendations which Steve Cook will present to you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Board today has before it for consideration 9 reports and recommendations received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. In each of these matters, the board has been provided with the complete evidentiary record prior to the meeting today, as well as the report and recommendation. And additionally, each of these individuals that is the subject of the report and recommendation has been notified that the board would be taking the matter up today and that they could come forward and briefly address the board. If any of these individuals are present, I'd ask them to come forward when their matter is called. The first report and recommendation before the board stems from a request to be removed from a voluntary self-exclusion list. Pursuant to the findings of fact and report and recommendation issued in this matter, an individual with the initials M.A. on January 1st, 2015 entered the Presque Isle Casino and requested to be placed on the lifetime self-exclusion list. The casino compliance representative on duty at that time interviewed M.A., completed all the appropriate paperwork and procedures, and thereafter M.A. signed an acknowledgement indicating she wished for a lifetime self-exclusion. Approximately 18 months later, on July 26, 2016, M.A. filed a request for early removal from the voluntary self-exclusion list, indicating that she had gained responsibility and she wanted to be removed from the list because she thought she could gamble more responsibly. Excuse me. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an answer objecting to the request, and a hearing was held on October 12, 2016. Both OEC and M.A. appeared at the hearing. At the hearing, M.A. testified essentially that at the time she placed herself on the list, she was in an abusive relationship and was coerced into being placed on the list. Notwithstanding that testimony, the report and recommendation subsequently issued by the hearing officer recommended that she remain on the list, and that is the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding MA's petition to be removed from the voluntary self-exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All opposed. The motion is adopted.
The next matter to be heard by the board today involves the report and recommendation of Mina Bashara. Mr. Bashara is present today. He's to come forward with an interpreter. It's my understanding that Mr. Bashara speaks only Arabic, so the board has obtained an interpreter for him.
Before we proceed, would both of you, yes, both have to stand. Would both of you please stand and be sworn by the court reporter?
You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this morning will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
And if the interpreter would please state and spell the names of both of you for the court reporter.
Mina Bashara. Interpreter Ibrahim Dallo, D-A-L-O.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll give a brief summary of the facts. On August 2nd, 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint The complaint requested that Mr. Bashara be placed on the board's exclusion list.
إنه يحطوه يعني عزل يعني.
The reason for that request was his leaving two children,
ولاده اثنين
aged 4 and 10 months,
10 أشهر
alone in his vehicle
وحده
at the
بالعربية
Hollywood Casino.
في كازينو هوليوود.
The children were alone for approximately 12 minutes.
الأولاد كانوا لوحدهم تقريبا مدة 12 دقيقة.
A hearing in this matter was held on October 6th.
في جلسة بأكتوبر 6.
Both Enforcement Counsel and Mr. Bashar appeared,
أنت والناس من هناك يجوا.
and both provided evidence.
الاثنين أعطوا أدلة.
Mr. Bashara testified that he had entered the casino
شهد إنه دخل كازينو.
only to see the amount of credit he had available on his player's account
كان عنده على الكارت تبعه بتاع اللعب بتاعه.
in the hopes of purchasing a meal for his children and himself.
وجبة له ولعياله.
He indicated that he had $35 in his account.
قال إنه عنده $35 بالحساب بتاعه.
He felt that wasn't enough to purchase a meal,
وحس إنه هذا ما كانش كفاية إنه يشتري وجبة.
and as such, he began to gamble in the hopes of securing more funds.
يأمر عشان يزيد النقط.
Notwithstanding that testimony,
وهاي الشهادة
the hearing officer found
يستقبل السمع الأخبار بتاعته.
that OEC's request should be granted and that Mr. Bashar should be placed on the exclusion list
أنت حضرتك يشيلوك من اللجنة
for at least 1 year.
كل لمدة سنة.
And that's the matter before the board for consideration. That's the recommendation before the board.
Thank you.
وهي اقتراح عندكم من اللجنة.
Does Mr. Bashara have any comments he wants to offer at this time?
هل عندك تعليق حابب تقوله في الوقت الحالي؟
هو أنا كنت بعت اعتراض على القرار بتاع القاضي.
I send an objection for the. You want to stand up?
No, I just wanted to speak louder so the court
Okay,
reporter can hear you.
thanks. Okay. I'm gonna ask him to repeat. Okay. عيد قلت لو سمحت.
أنا كنت بعت اعتراض للقاضي.
I send an objection to the judge.
شرحت فيه إن الشهادة اللي هو قالها دلوقتي بتاعتي فيها نوع من الخطأ وده عن طريق الترجمة.
And I explained that there is some issues with the translation. There was some kind of issues with the interpreter. أيوة.
بالإضافة إن أنا قلت كل الحقيقة.
In addition, I said the whole truth.
وعلى الرغم إن الكازينو قدم 4 أدلة والأربع أدلة
Even though
كلها
the
خاطئة.
even though the casino provided 4 evidence and they were all actually wrong. أيوة.
وأنا شرحت ده في الاعتراض بتاعي إيه الغلط اللي فيهم.
And I explained this in my objection. What's wrong with these 4 points? أيوة.
وهما كانت عبارة عن 4 ادعاءات كلها منافية للحقيقة.
There was like 4 allegations that was actually totally untrue. أيوة.
فهم لو يحبوا ان انا ادلي بشهادتي تاني مع مترجم تاني دلوقتي يبقى.
So if you would like me to give a second testimony using an interpreter, I can do that.
What's untrue? What was untrue?
Maybe to make it simpler, if you could just briefly tell us what are the things that were untrue.
ممكن يعني باختصار ايش الحاجات اللي مش مظبوطة؟
الحاجات اللي مش مظبوطة ان انا دخلت استعمل الفلوس اللي في الريوردز بتاعتي.
First of all, that the fact that I went inside to use the rewards that I have on my card. أيوة.
لقيت فيه $35 فقلت العب بيها عشان الريورد يزيد.
So I said I'm gonna use this money, the $35, so the reward point goes up. أيوة.
ده السبب الوحيد اللي خلاني قعدت 12 دقيقة لكن انا ما قعدتش 12 دقيقة عشان العب.
That's the only reason I spent 12 minutes. I didn't spend 12 minutes playing. أيوة.
انا لما يعني ما فيش حد بيروح الكازينو عشان يلعب بيستمر هناك المدة القصيرة دي.
Nobody goes to the casino to gamble and spends only this very short amount of time.
وأنا دفعت عن الكلام ده مخالفة مرورية يعني دي مش أكتر من إنها مخالفة مرورية.
And I paid fine. It's more like a traffic summons. أيوة.
على الرغم إن المخالفة كان فيها أخطاء بلغها الكازينو للبوليس، على الرغم من كده إن أنا اعترفت بيها برضه.
Even though the casino reported to the police the wrong allegation, I did admit the citation.
بس وده كل اللي أنا كنت حابب أضيفه يعني.
That's all what I have to say to add today.
اللي أنا طالبه منهم أنا قلت الحق وحاسس إن أنا مظلوم.
What I'm asking is that I tell the truth and I feel like I'm not being treated fairly.
وعلى الوجه الآخر الكازينو قدم 4 أدلة كلها غلط.
On the other side, the casino provided 4 false allegations. أيوة.
وهم خدوا في الاعتبار الاربع ادله بتوع الكازينو ولم ياخدوا في الاعتبار الحقيقه بتاعتي.
They took into consideration the four wrong points, and they never took care of what I have to say, actually. أيوة.
ونقطه اخيره، انا سبت الاطفال
And the final point I would like to add, I left the kids alone,
لعدم علمي بالقانون.
not knowing about the law.
ان ماي كانتري ان انا اسيب الاطفال في السياره ده لا يخالف القانون.
Because in our country, it's okay to leave kids in the car. It doesn't violate any law.
ونقطة لو في حاجة تدل ان انا ما اعرفش القانون.
Excuse me, I'm going to clarify. Yes?
اثبات تاني ان انا على غير على علم بالقانون.
And to prove that I'm not aware of the law. أيوة.
في الاعتراض اللي انا قدمته للقاضي.
And the objection that I submitted to the judge.
مكتوب فيه ان انا كنت بلعب في الكازينو اكتر من مرة.
It said that I was playing in the casino more than once.
والمكنة عملت ريستارت.
And the machine restored.
وانا ما عرفتش اخد حقي برضو عشان انا ما اعرفش القانون.
And I didn't know how to excuse me. يعني تاخد فلوسك يعني؟
ما عرفتش اخد تعويض عن الكلام ده
Yeah,
عشان ما اعرفش القانون.
I didn't know how to cash in because I don't know the law.
شكرا لك.
Thank you. Thank you. I just clarifying something. The motion before us is for a ban of how long?
At least 1 year, at which point he could petition to come off.
Okay, so the ban is for 1 year.
The recommendation.
Thank you very much. I open this up to questions from the board. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick question. Steve, and I heard the explanation by Mr. Bashara, but do we have video evidence that he gambled while in the casino for those 12 minutes?
I don't know if there's video evidence. Apparently there is video evidence.
He didn't play very long. It was approximately 21 times.
Okay.
But he gambled.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
He played the slot machine.
Just to clarify, what we've now been told is that he gambled 21 times. Is Mr. Bashara denying that?
انت بقول انه ضربت المكنه 21 مره، انت بتنكر الكلام ده؟ No.
Oh, he's not.
ما بتنكرش.
Thank you. Other questions up here?
في سؤال ثاني؟
Anybody?
سؤال ثاني؟
Any questions?
حد عنده أي سؤال؟ I would like to add one more thing,
Yes.
sir.
أنا مش مهتم إن أنا أدخل الكازينو مدى الحياة لو هم عايزين ياخدوا القرار ده.
I have no problem to be banned for life from entering this casino.
بس أنا اللي مهتم بيه إن أنا مش عايز يتحط اسمي على البورد.
But the thing I'm worried about, I don't want my name to be added or like listed on the board.
وأنا ممكن أكتب تعهد بالكلام ده.
And I can like sign something to guarantee that.
Question.
في سؤال.
And I'm not sure who said the penalty.
عارف إيش حق مين قال العقاب؟
The hearing officer.
5 years, but somebody said a year.
في حد قال سنة.
The
Mr. Chairman, is
recommendation.
it possible that we meet in executive session for a few quick minutes on this?
Sure.
نتكلم في الموضوع.
You excuse us for 5 minutes, please.
دقايق بدنا نتكلم بين بعض.
I mean, if she's still there. Yeah.
Amina?
Yes, I'm here.
Before we proceed, in the intervening few minutes there, do you have any further comments that you wanted to offer?
في عندك تعليق إضافي حابب تقول لنا إياه؟
مفيش. كل اللي انا عايز اطلبه منهم مش عايز اتعاقب عشان انا قلت الحقيقه. لو قلت الكذب.
Nothing. I don't want to be punished because I told the truth. Had I lied,
ما كناش وصلنا للنقطه دي، ما كناش.
I wouldn't be in this situation.
Okay, thank you.
أيوة،
Any
شكراً.
other comments from the board?
تعليق من الهيئة اللجنة.
Okay. Is there a motion?
هل في
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt in part the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the placement of Mina Bashara on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list.
Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Second.
May I- okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Assistant counsel will explain this to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
He'll explain it to you off the record. Moving on.
The next report and recommendation before the board involves Russell Collier. In August of 2016, Mr. Collier submitted an application for a non-gaming employee registration seeking work as an EVS attendant at Harris, Philadelphia. On September 6, 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel issued a notice of recommendation of denial of Mr. Collier's application based upon his criminal history. Specifically, between January of 2007 and March of 2008, Mr. Collier was charged with several firearm offenses. Mr. Collier requested a hearing, which was held on November 9th. Despite receiving notice, he did not attend. At the hearing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel presented testimony and documentary evidence pertaining to the criminal history, and as a result of that evidence, the hearing officer issued his report recommendation recommending that the application be denied, and that's the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Russell Collier's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
James Evans III is the next report and recommendation before the board today. Mr. Evans was issued a gaming employee occupation permit in July of 2008 and worked as a slot technician at Mohegan Sun Pocono Downs. On August 2nd, 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for emergency suspension with the board's executive director after receiving notice that Mr. Evans had been charged with several assault and endangering the welfare of children offenses, which included 3 felony counts. These charges stem from allegations that Mr. Evans struck 3 young children, which were his nephews by marriage, after one of the children's teachers noticed bruising on a child and reported it to the proper authorities. As a result of these charges, the executive director issued the emergency suspension as requested. Subsequently, a hearing on the validity of the emergency suspension was held before the Office of Hearings and Appeals. Mr. Evans, along with Enforcement Counsel, appeared at the hearing. During the hearing, Mr. Evans presented documentary evidence indicating that the Luzerne County Children Youth Services Department made an unfounded determination regarding the allegations of abuse, but the letter, in fact, does not provide any factual basis upon which the agency reached that conclusion. And in fact, the criminal charges, including the felony charges, remain pending against Mr. Evans. As a result of those felony charges remaining, the hearing officer's report and recommendation recommends that the emergency suspension remain in place.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the suspension of James Evans III gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next report and recommendation before the board today pertains to John Friend. In December of 2015, Mr. Friend submitted an application for a non-gaming employee registration seeking work as a grounds laborer at Presque Isle Downs. Mr. Friend disclosed his complete criminal history during the application process, and BIE's investigation confirmed that criminal history, which included a series of theft-related offenses between 2001 and 2013. As a result of that, OEC requested the application be denied. A hearing was held on October 27th as requested by Mr. Friend. However, he did not attend the hearing. After hearing the evidence of the criminal history as presented by OEC, the hearing officer issued a report and recommendation recommending the application be denied, and that is what is before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding John Friend's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Gabriel Galante's report and recommendation is the next matter before the board. On August 5th, 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Ms. Galante on the exclusion list after it was found that on July 2nd of last year, while only 19 years old, she attempted to gain access to Mount Airy. She was discovered at the entrance, charged, and pled guilty to carrying a false identification card. Ms. Galante requested the hearing before Hearings and Appeals, and it was held on November 1st. OEC and Ms. Galante filed stipulation of facts in which she did not contest. The facts of the case, however, essentially argued that she's a college student. She was concerned that this being placed on the exclusion list would inhibit her job opportunities or employment prospects upon graduation from college, and as a result requested that she not be placed on the list. Notwithstanding that plea, the hearing officer recommends that she be placed on the list consistent with past board practice.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt in part the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the placement of Gabrielle Galante on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list, and that Ms. Galante be placed on the involuntary exclusion list until at least her 22nd birthday, at which time she may petition for removal from the list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next report and recommendation pertains to Mark Moz. In August of 2014, Mr. Moz was issued a gaming permit and worked as a table games dealer at Harris, Philadelphia. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to revoke Mr. Ma's permit and place him on the board's exclusion list as a result of an October 3rd, 2015 incident in which a patron allegedly reported Mr. Moz was stealing chips from his chip rack while dealing Pai Gow poker. According to the Office of Enforcement Counsel pleadings in this matter, a review of Harris surveillance video confirmed the patron's report. Further surveillance showed that on a shift on September 26th of 2015, Mr. Moz also took chips from his chip rack through sleight of hand techniques. Mr. Moz was thereafter charged with theft-related offenses and was terminated by Harris. At the hearing held in this matter, the Office of Enforcement Counsel offered witnesses, video evidence, and testimony. Mr. Moz also put into evidence or testified on his own behalf, and his attorney argued that essentially he could not be found to have committed a theft, having the authorities not having found chips on his person, and also that an audit of his chips were never done, so the casino couldn't show that any were missing. Notwithstanding those arguments, the hearing officer concluded, particularly after viewing the video evidence, that a theft occurred, and as a result recommends that Mr. Moz, his permit both be revoked and he be placed on the board's exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding the revocation of Mark Moz's gaming employee permit and placement on the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The final two reports and recommendations before the board today are related and involve gaming level 2 employee permit renewal applications for Patrick O'Donnell and Jason Singelman. I would note for the record that their attorney, Kevin Hayes, is present in the room today. I don't believe he wishes to come forward unless the board has any questions. With these matters, because of the conformity of evidence, they were consolidated before the Office of Hearings and Appeals, and a hearing was held on August 9th, 2016. At that hearing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel and both parties, represented by Mr. Hayes, appeared at the hearing offering testimony and documentary evidence. Essentially, the facts of the case are that in December of 2014, both men submitted renewal applications to continue working at Mohegan Sun. Mr. O'Donnell to continue working as a dual rate lead poker supervisor, Mr. Singelman as a poker shift manager. In March of 2016, the Office of Enforcement Counsel sent both men notices recommending denial of their renewal applications due to facts surrounding a 2013 conviction on summary charges for both for disorderly conduct. Those facts also led to both men being suspended from their employment at the casino for approximately 4 months during the pendency of the criminal charges. Specifically, Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Singelman were alleged to have, on 2 or 3 occasions each, provided money to a bookmaker on behalf of a third person. The alleged bookmaker was Mr. Singelman's brother-in-law. At the hearing, Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Singelman testified to their employment history with Mohegan and the promotions both of them have received over the years. Additionally, both testified that they did in fact receive monies from a third parties. They knew the money was for gambling debts, and they provided them to the person in question. However, they argued also that they were substantially penalized for this conduct by their 4-month suspension from employment. Subsequently, reports and recommendations were issued for each of these individuals separately. And the hearing officer basically agrees with the arguments raised by Mr. O'Donnell and Mr. Singelman and recommends that their renewal applications be approved. Those are the recommendations before the board. We will need 2 separate motions. The first would be a motion regarding Patrick O'Donnell's report and recommendation.
Do I have such a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt and result the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Patrick O'Donnell's G2 employee occupation permit, and that Mr. O'Donnell's permit be approved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The second motion would involve Jason Singelman's report and recommendation.
May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt in result the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Jason Singelman's G2 employee occupation permit, and that Mr. Singelman's permit be approved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And that concludes the matters of the Office
Thank
of
you.
Chief Counsel.
Next, Sue Hensel, Director of Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be 621 principal key gaming and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be the consideration of 8 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of principal and key licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 3 principal and 5 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving the licenses.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, there are temporary principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 4 principal and 10 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are also gaming permits and non-gaming registrations for your consideration. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 409 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 182 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Also, there are recommendations of denial for 2 gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the denials.
Enforcement Counsel continues to request denial in each instance.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are withdrawal requests for key and gaming employees. In each case, the license or permit is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided you with a list of 2 key and 4 gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the order approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, we have an order to certify the following gaming service providers: the Herchevac Group Corporation and Kinsey Construction, Inc. I ask that the board consider the order approving these gaming service providers for certification.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 6 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering the gaming service providers.
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of Licensing.
Thanks, Susan. Next up, Office of Enforcement Counsel. Cyrus?
Good morning. I think it's still morning. The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 27 matters for the board's consideration today, consisting of 3 consent agreements, 7 revocations, and 17 involuntary exclusions. The first matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House HSP Gaming LP. I'll ask representatives from Sugar House to come forward, please. And I request that Mr. Donnelly enter his appearance into the record, introduce anyone that will be speaking and have them sworn.
Thank you. My name is John Donnelly, D-O-N-N-E-L-L-Y. With me is Linda Powers, who's the Director of Marketing for Sugar House, and Lynette Lee, who's the Director of Compliance. And I guess you should be sworn in case you are asked some questions.
Swear affirm the testimony you're about to give this will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
This matter arises from a referral made from the Bureau of Gaming Operations, which was subsequently investigated by the Bureau of Investigations of Enforcement. The Bureau of Investigations of Enforcement investigation revealed that on October 24, 2012, Sugar House initiated and conducted a credit promotion for approximately 90 days without ever submitting any information regarding the promotion to the Bureau of Casino Compliance, the Bureau of Gaming Operations, and/or the Department of Revenue as required by Sugar House's internal controls. Sugar House's 2012 credit promotion sought patrons to establish a credit line with a minimum credit limit of $500. In return, patrons would receive 5% of the approved credit line in match play coupons or free slots play. The 2012 promotion was marketed to 17,286 patrons, and 23 patrons ultimately participated in the promotion. Subsequently, on January 1st, 2014, Sugar House initiated and conducted another credit promotion similar to the 2012 credit promotion. The 2014 credit promotion was marketed to 4,533 patrons, and 4 patrons ultimately participated in the promotion. Once again, Sugar House did not provide the Bureau of Casino Compliance, Bureau of Gaming Operations, and/or the Department of Revenue with the rules of the promotion within 2 business days of commencing the promotion in violation of its improved internal controls. The 2014 credit promotion was not submitted by Sugar House until January 13, 2014, after the board's director of Racetrack Gaming discovered that the promotion was taking place and requested more information, to which Sugar House complied. The director of Racetrack Gaming forwarded the information to the Bureau of Gaming Operations. On January 14, 2014, the Bureau of Gaming Operations ordered Sugar House to discontinue the promotion and referred the matter to the Office of Enforcement Counsel, which led to the subsequent BIE investigation and discovery of the unauthorized 2012 promotion. The terms of the consent agreement require that Sugar House pay a fine of $15,000 and $2,500 for investigative costs incurred by BIE and other related staff within 5 days of the board approving the consent agreement. Barring any further discussion on the matter, the Office of Enforcement Counsel will request that the board approve the consent agreement.
Thank you. Any comments from Sugar House?
Yes, thank you. I want to make 4 quick points. Number one, the promotion substantively, there's nothing improper or untoward about it. Perfectly usual and typical kind of promotion where the company marketed it to its database and said, come back in, and if you establish a credit account, you can get certain slot play or match play. So there's nothing substantively wrong about it. Number two, as it states in the consent order, the marketing department has never had a violation before this one. They file everything. What happened in this one, the marketing department did not see this as what is in our own internal controls, which is what the petard we're being hoisted on, because that says a gaming-related promotion. And they didn't view that as a gaming-related promotion, so they didn't report it or file it. They filed it every other promotion. They've never been questioned with them before. So when the 214 promotion went out, and one of the casino compliance officers saw a flyer on it and went to marketing and said, "What's the story on this?" They then filed the rules on it because they just simply hadn't thought they had to file on that kind of promotion. We then, Linda Powers Group, went back and checked back to 2012 and found that we had done one before, again not reported because again they didn't think that that was a gaming-related promotion, and we self-reported that one. So we're dealing with one of them, one event in 2012 and one event in 2014 involving our patrons, 4 patrons in one case, and back in 2012, 23 people. Nothing wrong about the promotion. The problem is that we admit and acknowledge is that our own internal controls provide that we are to provide rules for gaming-related promotions. This is a close one. I mean, there isn't any, there is a gaming relationship because when you get to the casino, you get match play or slot play. But the thrust of this promotion was to go out to database people and say, come back in and we'll, if you establish a credit account, we'll give you reason to get back into the place. Now we know, and all these promotions are filed now as well. So those are my statements regarding it. And of course, Ms. Powers or Lynette are here to speak to any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from the board on this? Thank you. May I have a motion?
Dick.
No, he's got it. He's trying.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Sugar House HSP Gaming, LP, as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Mr. Chairman, may I address the retiring members of the commission for 1 second?
Sure.
All right. I was sitting listening to it, and I was thinking, as I sat back, and it started out like a wake everyone was talking about, and then the departed got to come up and speak, so that's a little different from what I'm used to. But I do want to thank you and wish both of you good luck. And I thought, what am I going to say? And this occurred to me. If I were emailing to someone, if somebody said, what's the story with this board? And this is what I would email. I say, they're a good board, they're knowledgeable, they keep their eye on the ball, which is jobs and revenue, and they don't fool around with the minutia. And you guys, thank you for that. That's all. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Jack Lindeman. I don't believe Mr. Lindeman or his attorney is present today. This matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel David Tepper.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. David Tepper, T-E-P-P-E-R, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. On July 30th, 2016, Jack Lindeman, who was 19 years old at the time, attempted to enter Mount Airy Casino and was asked for identification by Mount Airy's security personnel. At that time, Mr. Lindeman produced a false identification card, which identified him as being 23 years old. OEC engaged in negotiation with Mr. Lindeman by and through his attorney. Mr. Lindeman has entered into this consent agreement in where he agrees to be placed on the exclusion list until at least his 22nd birthday, which is October 9th, 2018, after which time he may petition the board to be removed from the exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Jack Lindeman as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mount Airy No. 1 LLC. This matter will also be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel David Tepper. However, I see Mr. Scalar is present. I would ask that he enter his appearance into the record and introduce anyone who will be speaking on this matter.
Michael Scalar, S-K-L-A-R, on behalf of Mount Airy, and with me is Boris Kostakov, and he is the Executive Director of Food and Beverage at Mount Airy.
Kostikovi. This proposed consent agreement involves an intoxicated patron incident which occurred at Mount Airy Casino on October 6, 2016. A patron was served 27 alcoholic drinks in 9 hours by 3 different bartenders. A review of this matter revealed that the patron was served 18 of those alcoholic drinks after he displayed signs consistent with intoxication. Eventually, this patron fell off his bar stool. The patron continuously placed wagers on a tabletop slot machine at Mount Airy's glass bar during the 9-hour period that he consumed the alcohol provided by Mount Airy. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve this consent agreement between the parties. The terms of the settlement include that within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Mount Airy shall pay a civil penalty of $25,000. Also within 5 days of the board's order approving this consent agreement, Mount Airy shall pay the board $2,500 for the costs incurred by OEC, BIE, and related staff consistent with this matter. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to address them at this time.
Does Mount Airy have any comments about this?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Let me say from the outset, it's unacceptable, this incident. Mount Airy takes this very seriously. The normal course with discipline at Mount Airy, like at other casinos, there's normally progressive discipline. Given the egregious nature of this incident, each of the 3 bartenders were terminated. There was no progressive discipline. They were let go immediately. I'm going to let Boris explain some of the remedial measures that were taken to ensure that something like this never happens again.
Yes, we conducted a retraining of all the food and beverage and security staff with ramp training. We have also changed our house responsibility guidelines, where if a guest consumes 3 drinks, they're to contact the beverage supervisor, and the beverage supervisor is to be present to assess the situation. And also for the third, all of the beverage supervisors, as they're conducting their day-to-day operations, they need to be more proactive and take better course in the action if noticing that someone's been in the same place for a long time, and be proactive in a situation where they need to research how many drinks has a guest had and take appropriate action accordingly.
Questions or comments from the board?
I do have a question. When you have successive bartenders, when you're changing shifts, do you have a provision that there's a handoff from one bartender to the next as far as service of a particular patron, as to number of drinks? How have you been handling that?
Yes. So in order to transfer, if someone starts an open check and a tab, we enforce that from here on out, a supervisor must be present when transferring the tab, so they can visualize and see if someone had excessive drinks. They actually have to be present to transfer a check, and if anything happens at that point of time, they investigate the situation going forward.
And a beverage supervisor is available 24/7?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sklar, I accept your comments, and I'm glad that you understand and your client understands the seriousness of this. This is pretty outrageous. To follow up, before I get to my real questions, to follow up on Commissioner Joel's question, what if the patron is paying by cash, so they don't have a running bar tab? What happens then on the handoff?
At that point, this new policy where if someone has 3 drinks per hour, they have to contact the beverage supervisor.
I'm sorry, how many?
3 drinks per hour.
Okay.
And they have to contact the beverage supervisor, where that was not the house responsibility before that. That's one of the changes that's been implemented after the incident. Okay. Previous house responsibility stated that it was to a server bartender responsibility to monitor consumption rate and level the intoxication of a guest. So we took that out of the hourly employee hands and put the emphasis on beverage shift managers to assist every situation where 3 drinks per hour are consumed.
Okay. What was this patron drinking?
Rum and Coke.
How much alcohol is in each rum and Coke?
There's 1.25 ounces of alcohol.
And how did this patron get home?
He was escorted by security after the incident has happened, and there was a medical report filed because the patron did fall off the chair. So,
how did he get home?
I believe security made sure that he got home using a taxi or...
I would like to finalize that and confirm that you, in fact, did provide a ride home for this patron.
We will provide exactly. I'm not quite sure. The state police got involved. He was, the patron resisted because he fell off the bar stool. EMT was called. And they wanted to take him in an ambulance to get checked out at the hospital. He resisted. State police was then called down to handle the situation. He absolutely, positively didn't drive himself. State police would have never permitted that.
Mr. Tepper, you look like you want to say something.
This gentleman was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police, and instead of going home, went to prison. Jail.
Okay. Right there, yeah. Thank you.
Other questions?
No, thank you.
Good. I'm astonished that about a couple of things, and not sure how to get the answers because you fired the people involved. But count me naive, but I don't understand how anybody who drinks 1.2 ounces of alcohol drinks wasn't already in the emergency room. It's kind of staggering number, don't you think? I don't mean to be ironic.
I couldn't agree with you more. The only thing I can say is, normally a lot of times the person would become disruptive in some way. That didn't happen here until he
wasn't in a coma.
Yeah, I believe me, I totally agree.
And then that leads to the other question, which you can try to provide a response to. What in the world was bartender number 3 or 2 thinking? Certainly you must have questioned them.
It's inexplicable what the bartenders did here. There's no excuse. They know what they're supposed to do, what the training calls for. The fact that he was able to sit there and be served that many drinks
belongs in Ripley's, believe it or not, as far as I'm concerned. Unless maybe there's not really all that much alcohol in your drinks, which would be an interesting defense. At any rate, any other questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mount Airy No. 1 LLC as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
The next 7 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the revocation of 2 gaming permits and 5 non-gaming registrations issued to individuals by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the complaint. The individual named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named individual. Thereby, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed complaints have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we will provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Next on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the non-gaming employee registration of Lorelei Votkowski, who is a beverage server at Hollywood Casino. While employed at Hollywood, Ms. Votkowski collected money from patrons for drinks and pocketed the money which she collected. As a result of her actions, Ms. Votkowski was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police, and the criminal matter is currently pending. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board revoke the gaming employee registration of Lorelei Votkowski.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Laura Lee Rakowski's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. John Crowe, C-R-O-H-E, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter before the board is a request to revoke the gaming permit held by Nicole Grease for stealing money from the Hollywood Casino while working as a cocktail waitress by collecting cash payments from patrons and keeping the money that was given to her. The charge of theft by unlawful taking was converted to a misdemeanor 3 and is still pending. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board revoke the gaming permit held by Ms. Grease.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Nicole Grease's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is a request to revoke the gaming permit held by Dorothy Henry, who, while working as a security officer at Mohegan Sun, obtained a key card, entered a guest room, and took $800 from the guest. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board revoke the gaming permit held by Ms. Henry.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Dorothy Henry's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter today is a request for revocation involving Zabria Whitmore. Ms. Whitmore was employed as a food court attendant at Valley Forge Casino Resort and registered as a non-gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint to revoke Ms. Whitmore's non-gaming employee registration after she was observed stealing money from the food court while working at Valley Forge. This time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Zabriah Whitmore's non-gaming employee registration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Zabriah Whitmore's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next matter today is a request for revocation involving Jessica Avery. Ms. Avery was employed as a food court attendant at Valley Forge Casino Resort and registered as a non-gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint to revoke Ms. Avery's non-gaming employee registration after she was observed stealing money from the food court while working at Valley Forge. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Jessica Avery's non-gaming employee registration.
Questions or comments from the board? I have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Jessica Avery's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter today is a request for revocation involving Denisha Perry. Ms. Perry was employed as a food court attendant at Valley Forge Casino Resort and registered as a non-gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint to revoke Ms. Perry's non-gaming employee registration after she was observed stealing money from the food court while working at Valley Forge. This time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Denisha Perry's non-gaming employee registration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Denisha Perry's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter today is a request for revocation involving Kobe Riley. Ms. Riley was employed as a food court attendant at Valley Forge Casino Resort and registered as a non-gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint to revoke Ms. Riley's non-gaming employee registration after she was observed stealing money from the food court while working at Valley Forge. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Kobe Riley's non-gaming employee registration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of Kobe Riley's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The remaining matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and/or licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days, as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each individual. Thereby, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. If the board orders the proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and summary of inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
John Crow again for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter before the board is a request to place Jeremy Ray Kane on the board's excluded persons list. Mr. Kane entered the gaming floor, gamed, consumed an alcoholic beverage, and obtained a cash transaction while under the age of 21. Mr. Kane was charged with 2 counts of unlawful for a person under the age of 21 to wager or play slots, and 1 count of purchasing consumption of alcohol by a minor. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board add Mr. Kane to the excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jeremy Ray Kane to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Kane may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, Glenn Stewart for the Office of Enforcement Counsel, STUART. Next for the board's consideration is the placement of Samantha Smith on the exclusion list. Ms. Smith pinched a $1,500 wager while playing roulette at the Valley Forge Casino Resort in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police charged Ms. Smith with 1 count of theft by unlawful taking, movable property, 1 count of knowingly by trick or fraud to win or reduce a loss, and 1 count of unlawful to take or claim with intent to defraud. Ms. Smith was recently approved for admittance into the Montgomery County Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition Program in relation to these charges. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel respectfully requests the board place Samantha Smith on the exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? I have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Samantha Smith to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next on the agenda is a request to place Tristan Stowell on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Stowell used a false identification card while underage in an attempt to gain access to the gaming floor at Mount Airy Casino. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board add Tristan Stowell to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Tristan Stowell to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Stowell may petition for removal from that list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board, Sarah Kolesar, Kolesar, on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Soren Larson. On May 29, 2016, Mr. Larson was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with violating Section 1518A13 of the Gaming Act after he accessed the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino using an illegally manufactured identification while under the age of 21. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Soren Larson on the involuntary exclusion list.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Soren Larson to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Larson may petition for removal from that list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of James Watson. On May 29, 2016, Mr. Watson was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with violating Section 1518A13 of the Gaming Act after he accessed the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino using an illegally manufactured identification while under the age of 21. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing James Watson on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of James Watson to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Watson may petition for removal from the list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next matter on the agenda is the involuntary exclusion of Joshua Bucksbaum. On April 2nd, 2016, Mr. Bucksbaum was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with violating Section 1518A13 of the Gaming Act after he accessed the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino using an identification belonging to another person while under the age of 21. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Joshua Bucksbaum on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Joshua Bucksbaum to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Bucksbaum may petition for removal from that list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Joseph Junkin. On May 30th, 2016, Mr. Junkin was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with violating Section 1518A13 of the Gaming Act after he accessed the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino using an illegally manufactured identification while under the age of 21. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Joseph Junkin on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Joseph Junkin to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Junkin may petition for removal from the list any time after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the involuntary exclusion of Benjamin Sommers. On May 30th, 2016, Mr. Sommers was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with violating Section 1518A13 of the Gaming Act after he accessed the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino using an illegally manufactured identification while under the age of 21. As a result, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Benjamin Sommers on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Benjamin Sommers to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Sommers may petition for removal from that list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Michael Rowland, ROL A&D with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. We have a request to place Taylor Michael Logan on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Logan, who's age 19, gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino by providing another person's legitimate identification. He both gamed and consumed alcohol and was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with carrying a false identification card and purchase of alcohol by a minor. The charges remain pending. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Taylor Michael Logan on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Taylor Michael Logan to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Logan may petition for removal from that list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Sohun Mayung on the involuntary exclusion list. Ms. Mayung, age 20, gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino through use of her legitimate Korean passport, which was misread by security. She was discovered after winning a jackpot. Ms. Mayung was not criminally charged, and the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Sohun Mayung on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of So-Hyun Mayung to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Mayung may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next two requests for placement on the involuntary exclusion list arise from the same fact pattern. We have underage patrons Kenyetta Meadows, age 20, and Thomas Rollins, age 19, who used false identifications to enter the gaming floor at Sands and successfully gamed. Mr. Meadows and Mr. Rollins were identified as underage after being involved in a fight in the Sands parking garage. Both were charged with and pled guilty to disorderly conduct. First, the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Kenyetta Meadows on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Kenyatta Meadows to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Meadows may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Thomas Rollins on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Thomas Rollins to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Rollins may petition for removal from that list anytime after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next 5 requests for placement on the involuntary exclusion list all arise from the same fact pattern. Shui Chiang Fang, Kong He Lin, Quan Lin, Bao Ying Yang, and Shu Fang Zheng were all involved in a physical altercation which lasted several minutes on the gaming floor at Sands Casino. Only Quan Lin, who initiated the altercation, was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with simple assault, harassment, and disorderly conduct. That case is closed, but the disposition has been unreported. First, the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Shohei Chiang Fang on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments on from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reject OEC's request to add Mr. Fong to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Kong Hee Lin on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Kong-Yi Lin to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Quan Lin on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Quan Lin to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Bao Ying Yang on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Bao Ying Yang to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And last, the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Shu Fang Zheng on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reject OEC's request to add Shu Fang Zheng to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Commissioner Fight, Commissioner McCall for all their support. And even though we agree to disagree sometimes, I appreciate everything that you've done for the agency, for the Commonwealth, and personally for me and my staff. So thank you, and we wish you well.
Thank you, Cyrus. And the same to all your attorneys, Cyrus. You know, the 6 years that I've been here, I know you've worked diligently to kind of briefly summarize the exclusions instead of going through the whole diatribe, and we greatly appreciate that. But I certainly appreciate the due diligence and the hard work that you do on a daily basis for this agency. I know you're under the radar screen oftentimes, but it's greatly appreciated and duly noted by all the board members for the hard work that you all do, and I thank you very much for that.
And I will, ditto that. You and I have had a great relationship over the years, and I value all the work that all of your attorneys do. And I started to, break up a little bit earlier when I was talking about the employees, but you are absolutely the best employees that I've ever worked with. And it goes across, it starts with Kevin and every one of you in here. Over the years, you've always been there for me. You've always done, some of the crazy things that I've asked you to do and some not so crazy things, but you've done it with a smile, with competence, and you really are just a tremendous staff. So I'm not going to get into naming names because I know I'll forget somebody, but you know what you mean to me, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes today's meeting. As I mentioned earlier, our next public session will be Wednesday, March 15th at 10 a.m. in this building. Are there any final comments from the board or ex officios? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I move adjournment reluctantly
Second.
of this meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you very much.